Good afternoon and welcome to the Nation Diplomatic Dispatch. I'm DANIAL RAHMAN. Joining us today is former Malaysian Ambassador Dato Dr. ILANGO KARUPPANNAN, who spent over 3 decades in diplomacy and has closely followed Malaysia's foreign policy journey. Dr. ILANGO, great to have you with us today.
Thank you very much.
Today we are going to rewind to the mid-1960s, a time when Malaysia was still finding its footing in the world. From the confrontasi period to how we shaped our Middle East policy, we'll look at how those early challenges helped define the way Malaysia engages with the world today. It'll be a fun episode, a very exciting one for those history buffs out there, Dato. So if I may begin, 1963 wasn't just the year Malaysia was formed. You've pointed to 28th March as a moment where the country suddenly understood how exposed it was in the international arena. What was happening during that time behind the scenes that made that date such a pivotal moment?
Well, first of all, thank you, Daniel, for having me on the show. It's a good one, I think. 28 March 1963, that was even before Malaysia was actually formed, right? Mm-hmm. We were talking about it. September 1963 is when we actually became in full formation. 28 March is actually a date which practically no one knows or remembers. It was the date when the Lebanese embassy or government approached Malaysia to appoint an ambassador to Kuala Lumpur. Mm-hmm. Now at that time nobody knew why this was important. It only became important several years down the road. I hope we can have this conversation as we go along. Mm-hmm. But that was the starting point for Malaysia's full-time engagement in the Middle East, if you will.
Right.
Because before that we just had some basic relationship with them, but it became very important for us to do that. And I can trace it back to 28 March 1963. Now, why Lebanon, first of all? Yes. I think you want to ask that question as well. Lebanon is a tiny country, half the size of Perak, By the way, Malaysia has extensive relations with this country. So my question when I was ambassador there, what are we doing with Lebanon? Why is Lebanon too important to us? And that is what led to this question. So when we look at it, we find that Lebanon wanted to have an ambassador, mm-hmm. but eventually it set off a chain of events, and I think that is what we are going to talk about next. So let me just stop at this point.
Sure. So 28th March, pivotal moment, Lebanon, some intrigue, and Malaysia's foreign policy. Perhaps in those years, I've watched one of your videos online on Diplomatify. I think it's a great channel, and people should be following you. You mentioned that Malaysia only had a presence in Cairo and Jeddah. So in that regard, decisions by the Malaysian government at that point had to be sharp, selective, very intentional. How did operating such a small diplomatic footprint shape Malaysia's early foreign policy instincts?
Great question. When you're a small country, especially before we became a full federation, right? Mm-hmm. We needed to have, first of all, friends, number one. We needed to preserve our traditional markets for our goods, right? Mm-hmm. And we were main producers of tin and rubber. So that was very important. Then third, you needed a support system for your defense, because your defense infrastructure was also very weak at that time. So where can you get all these three? So Malaysia had to be, of course, aligned to the West. Great Britain was our former colonial master, and we also had to be aligned with the West because almost all our tin and rubber were being bought by America and UK, right? So foreign policy was not a very big thing. Mm-hmm. The budget at that time, 1960, was about $12 million only, which is less than 1% of the budget of that time,
Right.
And the country operated with 77 diplomats at that time. Mm-hmm. More than half of them were overseas. Right. And we had, by 1963, we had 14 embassies. Right. 57, we started with 7. And all of them, you can guess, they were in the major capitals, right? So the interest and the focus at the time was, number one, telling the story about Malaysia, preserving our territorial integrity, mm-hmm. Making sure that we got markets and investments were coming in, and all that. So that is how we were actually looking at foreign policy. We were not looking at the big pictures,
Yeah. So what changed on 28 March 1963, leading to the formation of Malaysia, that has brought about this important conversation today?
Right. 2 months before that date itself, mm-hmm. Dr. Subandrio, the foreign minister of Indonesia at that time, mm-hmm. under Sukarno, declared confrontasi against Malaysia. It was the 20th of January 1963. Now that was a shocking thing for Malaysia, because Malaysia had gotten on the belief that we are good with everybody, so nobody should have a problem with us, right? I mean, we mind our own business and so on. But here, a big neighbor, a friend, ally, basically in many ways, historically too, suddenly is turning against us. We didn't understand exactly what was going on, but at that time we didn't understand how bad it was even.
Right. So why was it declared as such?
He declared confrontation against Malaysia because the moment we announced that we are going to form Malaysia, Indonesia saw this as some sort of neo-colonial construct. They saw Malaysia as a puppet of the Great Britain to control the states of Sabah, Sarawak and part of Kalimantan, where Indonesia had a big interest as well.
Right.
So Indonesia saw its own territorial integrity being threatened by this whole idea. And therefore they issued a confrontation, but they didn't want a full war. They wanted to foil the whole thing. They didn't want Malaysia to actually happen. So there was limited military incursions in Sarawak and Batu Pahat and all these kind of places. But a bulk of it was diplomatic warfare, which we didn't even know at that time. With 77 people, and you mentioned 2 embassies in Cairo and Jeddah, there's no way we can notice all that, right?
Right. So what was happening diplomatically in the Middle East that relates to the proclamation of the confrontasi back then?
We, of course, I must say that Great Britain was helping us a lot at that time because we didn't have embassies everywhere, right? Great Britain had footprint all over the world. So they were providing us feedback on what was actually happening in Jakarta, what they were saying. And our own ambassador in Cairo noticed at that time, there's a lot of delegations from Indonesia visiting Middle East and North Africa. And so he suspected something was afoot, some kind of campaign was being done there. And so while we were still digesting the information, one day the bombshell fell. A newspaper in Khartoum, Sudan, which is part of Africa, I mean North Africa, right? Headlines: Malaysia, Far East Israel.
Oh my.
And can you imagine, Indonesia has gone to the extent of calling us the Far East Israel here. And that was a bombshell because we didn't expect that could be the extent of this kind of damage. But anything associated with Israel is really very toxic, especially if we are talking the Middle East. And you can imagine all the countries there were already bought over. They thought that, that Indonesia had got its point right.
Yeah, and there were many competing stories about Malaysia's formation and what it meant, and I suppose the lack of a diplomatic presence there meant that one side of the narrative was being shared more so than the other side. Like you've mentioned, we were very small in our presence. How did these conflicting narratives influence the way Malaysian diplomats had to present the country in the Middle East, or globally, in fact?
Well, Indonesia alone had 3,000 diplomats.
Wow.
We had, as I told you, only 77.
Yeah.
That is, half of it was overseas, half of them were at home. So we absolutely were completely outnumbered by the Indonesian side. So what was our tactic at that time was, number one, we had to sell the story that Malaysia was formed properly, according to international laws, according to proper assertion by the United Nations, the will of the people, no coercion of any sort. And we also made it clear that we were not under instructions from any particular power or so, it wasn't a neo-colonial object. And we also made it clear that, the formation of Malaysia would also be favorable to also Southeast Asia as well, and Indonesia too, because, meaning that bigger markets, bigger, trading, all that kind of stuff. So the policy, we thought it was good enough to just explain that we were following international law and that we, were all, on the, legally correct.
Yeah.
But in diplomacy, one thing one learns after 33 years as well is that, it's not always so straight. You have to be more creative in terms of articulating your views. So we have to understand what was the real story that was being told. And I told you just now, Khartoum's headline told us that the story was something else altogether. The story was, we have nothing to do with Malaysia. We are an ally of Israel. So we now have to shift the story. The story is, and therefore to tell the story, we can't just tell the story around the world. We need to find out where is it going to be heard the most. So what was going to happen at that time was a conference of the non-aligned movement or the Afro-Asian countries in Algiers. The first one was in Bandung. Indonesia was the boss, right? Second was going to be Algiers, so it was too important for us to be there. But the problem was Indonesia had already blocked all the roads and all the doors as well. They told everybody, don't support Malaysia. This is a neo-colonial puppet. If you support them, you are not against us and all that kind of stuff. So Malaysia needed to find a foothold into this thing. So that was actually an adventure by itself, trying to get into a grouping where you're not wanted.
Right. So who were, when these things happen, you often see countries take a pause and review their relationship with Malaysia. And now you're mentioning that the non-aligned movement seemed like it had to be something or a position that Malaysia adopted. Who were Malaysia's allies at this point who said, let's take a step back and maybe we should listen to what they have to say or their side of the story?
Well, first of all, the British thought that we better fight the battle in the non-aligned, in the Afro-Asian group, because that was where a lot of the noises were coming from.
Right.
So we had to get our narrative correct over there, And at that time, Indonesia, China, and eventually Pakistan as well, were all forming an alliance against Malaysia. And it was a very powerful alliance. Pakistan story is something else. We will talk about it later as well, I hope. But it was not an easy job, to do this thing, because you're not part of that conversation. You have to be part of the conversation before you can actually tell your story. But when you're actually not even invited or allowed in through the door,
right,
you can't do it. So, but Malaysia realized that, first of all, we got to find allies in the Middle East. And we realized that we didn't have really too many friends among the Arabs. But we saw that the Arab-Israeli issue as a distant problem from us.
Right.
And as I told you, we're a small country, we don't want to deal with too many other things, right? But this time we realized that, look, we really have to associate ourselves with the Arabs, tell them, look, we are 100% with you on this conflict, you can count on this as your supporter, etc. Because we need friends. So that was one of the policies that had to change. 3 policies had to be changed immediately.
Right. What were those 3 policies?
The 3 policies, number 1 was first I told you we were aligned to West, right? We had to become non-aligned.
Right.
Because that was the language that all the Afro-Asian countries were talking. You cannot be speaking another language if you want to get into the club. The leaders of them, Indonesia, India, Ghana, Cairo, they were all talking this language. Yeah. We had to do that. Yeah.
But we were always seen, if I may just jump in, as one of the sort of founders or leaders within the non-aligned movement. Is that perhaps a misapprehension then?
Who?
Malaysia as one of the leaders within the non-aligned movement back in the early 60s.
No, we never were the leaders.
Okay.
We were actually the outsiders.
Right.
We were, even until today, we are not the leaders too. So if anyone tells you that we are leaders there, then they are not telling the truth or they don't know the history. But let me tell you this. So we needed to shift to what they call non-alignment. But, it was a problem because in the country, Tunku didn't like the idea because he was worried that non-alignment, the language of that was more of the language of the socialist countries and the communist countries. In the 60s, we were still fighting a war in the jungles, with Malaya, right? So we didn't want to have any association with communism. Tunku's worry was that. But we had to change because that language is important. Number two, we had to become close to the Arabs. So therefore, we had to take on a new Middle East foreign policy. Middle East had to become now a priority in Malaysia's foreign policy. Although it's a faraway issue, but it has to become an important thing at the top. Number 2. Number 3, we needed to completely disabuse the idea of being anything related to Israel. So our policy on Israel had to become really clear. Before that, we were, sort of liberal. We had some kind of trading relationship with them, etc. But after 1963, this event, we had to cut it all off. It might interest your listeners that in 1963, Israel even had a trading office in Kuala Lumpur.
Oh, interesting.
The office was called Inter-Asia Trading Company. I think somewhere in Jalan Tunku Abdul Rahman. I could be wrong, that's where the office was. So they were trading in this country. In 1964, the company decided it was not economically viable to have an office. So they decided to close it down. But guess what? The Israeli government, foreign ministry, decided to take it over. So then sent their diplomats to run the trading office.
Right.
So, and they run it as a consulate in what they call an official consulate from 1964 to 1967.
Wow.
In Kuala Lumpur. Can you beat that?
That's very interesting. And what eventually led to its closure?
The closure was we had to shut it down.
Right.
So we asked them to, of course, close down and move off. All trade links were closed. Those of you who are old enough, like myself, you would remember that in 1960s you can buy oranges called Jaffa oranges, very nice ones. But they were all off.
No longer.
No more trading, no more studies, no more travel, nothing. Everything had to be cut. So those were the 3 major foundational policies, which are still our foreign policy thing today. You can see them today.
Right. And those 3 policy shifts, how were they viewed in the context of impacting the confrontasi at that point in time?
Well, number one, when we shifted to use a non-aligned language, suddenly, not suddenly, I mean, gradually we found that many countries realized that Indonesia wasn't being totally honest with them. Because we made it clear that we were not some kind of a puppet of Great Britain for that matter. So countries like Ghana, which is an important player, India, a very important player, they all realized that Malaysia was another developing country just like them, who's trying to find its footing in the world. So we gradually became more, we had more and more friends, and we got accepted into it as a full member. And the fact that we had prioritized Middle East, the Arab-Israeli conflict as an important plank of our foreign policy, also made us important partners with the Arabs as well. They saw our consistency as a good thing for them. So that made us welcome not only within the Middle East and the Arab countries, but because they're also part of the bigger group of the non-aligned movement. So we got ourselves, inserted.
Right. So what did that mean tangibly in terms of the manifestation of Malaysian diplomatic presence in the Middle East? You were a High Commissioner, Ambassador to Lebanon once upon a time. What did that all mean, or how did it all culminate from your viewpoint?
Okay, so as I told you, we had only Cairo and Jeddah, right?
Right.
Obviously, we needed to have a more diplomatic presence on the ground. So when we looked around, at that time in 1963, just after this thing happened, all the countries were hostile. We were still trying to develop a policy, right?
Right.
No one was listening to us. But we knew that Lebanon had already tried to appoint an ambassador in 1963, 28th of March.
Right.
So at least we had one country where we can actually try our luck. So that's when we decided that Beirut is where we should have an embassy.
Right.
Plus, Beirut was the official air hub.
Right.
If you needed to travel to that part of the world, you had to stop in Beirut.
Oh.
And therefore was a good place. Plus, Beirut was just next door to Israel.
Right.
So sitting in Beirut means that it's a good listening post. You can hear what's going on further down in the south.
Right.
So Beirut was a place where we wanted to open, and we eventually did that. But a full-fledged embassy came only much later. It was until 2005 only we actually have the full-fledged diplomatic mission.
Oh, it took a bit.
So many of these things had to happen. Other things had to happen between. But I discussed all of them in my book, as I told you, which I'm writing, and I'm hoping to get a publisher to do this. It will be a very interesting story to read.
Yeah, and since what you see is these positions being taken, who are the key champions and leaders of these change at that point in time that enabled this to happen from a Malaysian context? Who are the unsung heroes, if you could call it that? Because I would think that the Foreign Ministry, as it was then known, I think it had a different name back then, External Affairs. What were the discussions that were happening internally, and how did they view these moves as being something that protect Malaysia's longer-term interests and even its existence?
Well, the Foreign Ministry, or at that time it was known as the Ministry for External Affairs, right? British way of doing it. Tun Ghazali Shafi was the Permanent Secretary, so he was actually the head of the whole thinking part of it. Tunku Abdul Rahman was Foreign Minister.
Right.
And Tun Razak also was Foreign Minister after that, So the Prime Ministers were the big chiefs over there, but Tun Ghazali Shafi provided continuity in terms of his connection, understanding, all that. He, in his own book, has written that he's got his own boys, a group of 7 or 8 men, who were actually the ones who actually were in thick and thin of the issue. One of them was Tan Sri Zainal Abidin Sulong, who was some time ago KSU of the ministry. Gentleman passed away. There are other names like Jack De Silva, and many others. It's a pity that I'm not able to talk to all of them because many of them have gone already. The ones who are left are still too old to actually say very much. But it was a very small group, hardly 7-8 people with Ghazali Shafi and Tunku Abdul Rahman.
Right. So events of the 1960s, 63 to be precise, have shaped Malaysia's policy, as you've mentioned, up until today. The world has changed, but certain instincts haven't necessarily changed. What elements of this thinking do you see most visible in Malaysia's current foreign policy positions?
Well, our foreign policy has been, remarkably consistent over 6 decades now. Right. That's number one. We do not internalize foreign policy for domestic affairs. Foreign policy has always been kept as a foreign policy issue.
Right.
It's important because we need to be, we need to preserve our credibility out there. When we are talking on a particular issue, the interlocutors out there must know that this is coming from the source of our foreign policy thinking.
Right.
It's not driven by some domestic considerations. So, in the case of Middle East, for example, we have always been consistent that we support the Arab position on how they see the conflict should be ended.
Right.
The conflict should be ended, according to them, by having a two-state solution. And we have been consistent all the while. Whatever they say is whatever we follow. So along the way, you know, PLO became the sole representative of Palestine. So be it, we continue to recognize that entity as a representative. Although there are others like Hamas and others, you know, but we did not try to insert ourselves in their policies and take sides with one side or the other. We took the official representative as the person that we need to talk to.
Right.
By the way, Malaysia was one of the very, very first countries to have actually allowed the PLO to operate in office. We did that in 1969. Can you believe that? Well before any Middle East country even had an office.
So Malaysia has been a trailblazer, defender of the rights of the Palestinians, moving towards a two-state solution. Today, you know, what do you see of the role that Malaysia has taken in leading not just ASEAN but also voicing out its position against what's happening in Gaza? Do you think that we are doing enough, and can we do more?
No, I think we are doing practically more than enough, actually. You know, I mean, not to say more than enough in that way, but we're actually doing well because that position that we take is important. As I told you, to be consistent on one position for a period of time is very important. People need to know that this is important. If you just say this for a season and then say something else in another season, people won't take you seriously.
Yeah.
But everyone knows that Malaysia is very serious about this, how this thing should end, you know, that it should end with two states.
Right.
And that is what we, and so our position is consistent and very important, because not only we speak, because when we speak in that consistent manner, we encourage others as well who are with us to also echo the same sentiments that we do, because we don't jump from, you know, as I told you, erratically.
Yeah. We've been consistently a non-aligned for a very long time now, based on what you've said. But of course, in today's day and age, it is being defined by US-China trade war, or even everyone saying Malaysia should take a side, right? There's BRICS, all these new emerging global organizations. Looking back, Dato', from, you know, when Malaysia was young, vulnerable, and constantly challenged, yet still managed to define itself diplomatically, what are some of the key lessons from that era that you believe Malaysia must hold on today, or what should Malaysia let go of in order to move forward?
First thing, I think, you know, you're never entirely secure. Don't ever jump to the belief that just because we are, you know, much more developed than we were in 1963, that we are safe and that we can do whatever we want. That insecurity is always there. So, because, you know, there are only permanent interests. There are never any permanent friends anywhere, you know. So that's the first thing that you always got to remember. So vigilance is the key when we talk about diplomacy. Our interest has to be at the primary thought process of whatever we do. We shouldn't use foreign policy, as I told you, as a domestic tool. Unfortunately, I see quite a bit of these things happening now. I'm sad about it, but, you know, I think that's the wrong thing to do, because that undermines us, that weakens us. So we should not be taking sides with other countries' internal problems. We should be consistent on what's important. That is, number one, you know, the developing countries need space to develop. We should not be pushed to take sides with one or the other. So the non-alignment movement is relevant for all times, you know, because today is China and Russia, today and China and US, but, you know, 50, 60 years down the line, it could be some other form of contest, you never know. But this policy of not taking sides will still be relevant.
Right. Dato', final words from you. We've got about 30 seconds left on what's your advice to diplomats of the future in continuing to uphold Malaysia's foreign policy and developing it in times to come?
Well, number one, I think you've got to read up as much as you can about the history of the country, because I think our Malaysia's foreign policy history is also very instructive. A lot of things are there, but unfortunately, because the pace of life is so fast today, maybe we don't have time to do all that. So I'm hoping in my small way to educate, you know, the diplomats and others through my own channel, Diplomatify. I touch on some of these points. This video is one of them. Hopefully that book that comes out soon will also do that. For the young people, please read up and you must remember that you have a say in the safety and stability of the country.
Yeah. Dato', thank you very much for reminding us that Malaysia's diplomacy was shaped long before today's headlines by decisions made under pressure and with lasting effect. Those early choices still guide how Malaysia engages with the world today. This has been a very insightful episode looking back at history of the Nation Diplomatic Dispatch. I'm Daniel RAHMAN. Thank you for watching. Till next time.
Thank you very much.